Alright, so today I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm just going to look at some of the openings for a couple stages in Catherine Classic and try theorycraft and come up with stuff. So, showcase some pushes. Might be important to know. We'll start with Underground, kind of basic. I really like Underground. It's pretty flexible with what you can do with it. It's so simple to push out in Classic that it makes it, we have a lot of options. You know, so obviously the simple solution, right, is that either player can climb up the middle. One thing that's kind of neat is that in Classic you can push and pull, and that middle column all comes down. That's like the day one or day zero, whatever you want to call it. I think technically the day zero would be getting somebody on the push-pull across the middle. I don't have two controllers here, so this is a little tricky, but if, you know, one player is running across the center and you push and pull out from underneath of them, if they fall on this level, that's the day zero, but if they fall on this level, that's the day one. So that's that's one way to go about things. But if you want to combat somebody who is climbing and you want to do something slick, yeah, a couple different options for Underground. So real simple is you can kind of push out everything since there's no depth to the stage. Alright, so you can just make your way across and just kind of do something like this. And the whole stage goes. It does respawn, obviously, if both players are down here. Sometimes it depends on, you know, how fast you do it, but yeah, you can see the stage will come back. It will spawn on, like, the deepest edge. So, I guess if you wanted to, something that you could do that would be kind of slick would be to do something like this, where you intentionally do something kind of crazy, where you take this and you extend that, right? You see how this is one deeper, so the stage spawns back here instead of over there. Or if you have this item block, right, you can just kind of toss that out. But yeah, I'll show another variation on the push out. It's pretty simple once you kind of get the concept. You can do it even from like one stage lower, right? You see how I'm doing it from down here now. You can kind of make your way across, and any sort of variation like this is fine. You know, the idea is that there's no depth, and so you can push out the stage. I'm trying to think if there's anything else really tricky on Underground. I don't think there's anything really worth talking about. One kind of opening that I like to do sometimes is if you get the timing right, you can actually do stuff on one level lower. So if you push and you see the block will start to shake, you can actually push it while it's shaking, so you can do something like this. So I'll show that again, but pretty much, you know, you can push an invisible block, or you push it while it's falling, and so if your opponent was, you know, over top of that, you can use that to get them. So it's pretty slick. I'll show it one more time. Or actually, this is all recorded, so you can just go back. But pretty much watch, you know, this middle column. You can do something 1, 2, 3. Oh, 1, 2, 3. And yeah, you can push that out. And that also achieves the same as the day one, right? Because again, that middle section is just so weak that it's super easy to push out. So I'll just climb up so we can get that out of the way. I'm trying to think what else is really worth talking about. Underground, showed some push outs, talked about easy climb. I guess some of the things that I think are super important on this stage are like this block, I think gives you a lot of leeway. You're protected, you don't have to worry about dive kick, and then you also provide defense over your row, right? Like if player 2, I wonder is this, no, it's not keyboard. If player 2 tries to come across this center way, if you are spidering, that gives you some defense. So that's just something to keep in mind. Is you know, it's such like a very close stage that you can either if somebody just goes ahead and just climbs, it's super easy to push out. So really the way that you kind of have to play it is a little bit of a waiting game to see, okay, what is my opponent doing? You kind of wait for a couple levels of the stage to fall, and then you're free to climb. And so you should have in mind either you just kind of play some defense, kind of like some spider defense, right, and stop the other person from coming over to your side, which could be as simple as doing that push out across the middle, right? You know, you drop that top level, and then the stages are split. But then it becomes a game kind of controlling that split, because player 2, right, could just as easily on the other side be pushing and pulling this, right? And there's, you know, not to mention possibly pulling out, and now you've got 2 bridges here that are pretty tricky to keep track of. I mean, I guess you could do something kind of like this, right? But, yeah, that's just off the top of my head, is, if somebody climbs, you know, the simple flowcharty kind of response, I guess, if we're talking about it, is that if somebody just straight up climbs, you push out the stage. If they try to stay lower, right, then really I think what you should try to do is just keep positional advantage. So if you see somebody, right, starting a push out on their lower level, maybe a good spot to be would be in this middle column, right, if Orange's response was to kind of chill up there and wait to see what your opponent does, and try to set up how to get them. And I think probably the blocks that have a lot of potential on this stage are this block, and of course it's symmetrical, so you know, I really like that because it makes push out like super easy to convert into. You know, you can kind of see where I'm going with that, but it also gives you, you know, your spider defense on this first level, which makes it pretty safe. You don't have to worry about being like dive kicked or anything like that. And then, of course, talked about like the day 1, day 0 stuff. And then, yeah, something I like to do sometimes is just push out that top one. And this is something I've been playing around with recently, is just kind of doing a more, instead of a super easy to see push out, is something like this, right? Where you are pushing out the tower as you're climbing. Because that makes it hard for your opponent to make the decision, okay, when am I coming back, right? Like, it's super easy, obviously, if you see your opponent pushing out the whole stage and it's an obvious tell, you know what to do. But you kind of want to fake them out sometimes, right? And so sometimes I think on this stage in particular, it's nice just pushing out that outermost column makes it where, okay, you know, this way you could climb, or you could actually fight it out, right? Like, it's ambiguous. It's very ambiguous. And of course with Classic, right, you get your, the farther back you are, actually, the more likely you are to spawn X Factor. So it's kind of a game where you want to climb, but you don't want to climb too fast, because if you climb too fast, the other person will get X Factor and kind of storm ahead. So I think that's enough really said about Underground. Yeah, it plays out really cool. I guess next I'll just kind of go into Torture. It's kind of off the cuff, you know, just kind of spontaneous. Just, I was bored and I wanted to record myself, you know, thinking up some stuff. And I figured, well, if anybody else wants to chime in or hear some opinions, they could do that. So this stage is interesting. Notice that the stage actually is, oh, I goofed up there. But the stage has some depth at the bottom there, and so if you just try a basic push out, what actually will happen is that the stage will get caught. You see, now it's kind of looking like Swiss cheese a little bit. It becomes really kind of messy. And it takes kind of too long to push out, right? And then it gets caught in the back, and it's just a big mess. So, you know, you don't want to push out from too low on this stage, if at all. I think recently it's becoming more frequent to push out the stage. and most of that comes from you can do it depending on what this level is. Typically, any 2 level section you can push out pretty easily. Becomes a little trickier with 3, but you can do something kind of like that. I'm trying to think of probably the better way to push that out, if anything. Because you can kind of do something on the 2nd level here, you know, where you can push out this center. Typically, general rule of thumb is that pushing out the center is pretty nice because it makes the tower lose a lot of stability. Again, though, you see how even pushing out makes it where it caught onto the back and kind of makes it really difficult to do. So pushing out isn't as viable of an option on this stage. Neither is really farming. It kind of is, but kind of not. The reason why I think is because it's so easy to play defense on this stage that it kind of loses its viability. Let's see, I'm trying to think if there's a good way to push this kind of pattern out, because this stage has like 2 or like 3 or 4 different patterns that kind of get annoying. And I guess you could do something kind of like this, right? You can kind of see where I was going with that. The tricky part is, I wonder if I have... No, I can't like move my mouse and highlight stuff. But the tricky part really is that usually this outermost column just takes up, like, it's so high that it takes so long to push out. Something like this is kind of okay, right? Because that's just a simple, you know, you can push that away. But in general, it just becomes very hard. Yeah, I'm trying to think of a good way to get like a reliable push out on this stage. I don't know if you can do that. Maybe, no. I was trying to think of something to do, like, again down here, right, where, aha, you know, I simplify it to one push, push, and push, and there's a pretty neat drop, but it's not really satisfactory enough for me. Maybe, well, regardless, if you get up to a point like this, it again kind of looks just like underground, right, where anytime you get to this too high kind of pattern, you can just push across relatively easily. Something I like to do sometimes on this stage, maybe just to mix up what we're talking about, is crossover early. Typically, players didn't used to do this, and the obvious reason is that the opening is constructed in such a way where it's pretty easy and usual where both players will try to climb. And so even if you cross over early, the other player will be ahead of you, so it won't be like, you won't be able to directly fight. The only one where that kind of happens is on a certain opening variation. Let's see if it comes up in the next 1 or 2, and I can kind of talk about that a little bit. But if not, then oh well. Well, this is the opening variation where it's a little bit easier to push out, right? I mean, that's something to talk about. If you get the too high variation, I mean, this is just simple, right? I mean, you know, it doesn't really matter what the other person does. You can force a fight. So that's one thing. Again, most of the openings on Torture, I think, come down to what spawns, which is kind of neat, but kind of frustrating as well, right? I like pushing, or pulling a lot. I think it's a little bit more of a defensive move, but it's probably faster just to do pushes. But yeah, you could do stuff like that for push-outs. I'm trying to think if there's anything really cool on this stage, and there kind of isn't. There is a way to kind of do some dropout stuff, so that might be nice. Not a full push-out, right, but a different way to climb. I don't know, I'm just trying to think. This is turning into a weird push out, but you see how this kind of isn't any good because if 2P was just standing right here, they kind of have control over everything you're doing. So that's not really too good. Yeah, Torture is one of these stages where I feel it's kind of crappy because the opening it just feels so static. One thing I guess you could do is you could do something like this, where you push and you lower yours intentionally one side. And you could do all sorts of stuff here. One thing that I like to do a lot on the stage is push this row of spike blocks. Especially, you know, if your opponent is climbing, you can sometimes get them by doing a push out and it will activate underneath of them. That's one thing to keep in mind. Not really sure what else there is on this stage. I kind of mentioned the early crossover. I mentioned it's difficult to kind of push out. Maybe something that would be simpler is maybe in the future. Really, it all comes down to this outermost column is so tall, right? Even from down here, it's so tall that it's very hard to do something with it. That comboed with the fact that the shape, if you envision that you're looking at the stage from the side, it's kind of like got this V shape, right? Where you start is in the apex, is in the middle of this variation, where, you know, it starts deeper and then comes out and then goes back in, right? Like, I can go down here. I wonder if there's anything you can do with down here. Oh, that was kind of cool. I don't know if it really gives you anything, but that would be one possible variation that might be interesting. Just because it might be cool to intentionally start a little bit lower, right, and start a little bit slower, kind of like I was saying before. Might be good for farming purposes. Let's see if there's anything you can do down bottom. That might be cool. So if I am looking at this right, there's also something back here. Yeah, okay. So it's got this weird kind of structure to it. I wonder I could do something like, oh, that one didn't quite work out. Oh, there has to be a block there, right? No, there isn't. Okay, there isn't a block under that. So you can't do like a push-pull to farm down there, which that would be cool. Well, maybe you can if you do something like this. I'm trying to think if there's a way you can farm down bottom. But it doesn't look like there's any spots where it's like 2 in a row where you could push-pull. I don't know if you really would want to anyway. I feel like it would take too long. But it would be very nice if you could get X Factor super early on this stage. And so that's why I was kind of drawn to going down here. You could do something like this. You could push in, but yeah, I mean, you can kind of get around, right? Ah! But, I don't know. There's potential there, I think, but I don't know if there's enough. I don't think anybody has really explored going down there because I think it's kind of apparent, but maybe not. I mean, obviously your two ways are either that or that. You could push again, maybe? Yeah. Down there, it's not very pretty. There's not a lot of room to work with, and it's also hard to see, so that is a problem. I do kind of like the idea of going this way, out, in, like that, and then maybe down like that. That looks kind of cool. I wonder if there's anything you can do with that. If there's anything that you can do to make it easier for you. Because that doesn't take too much time, and if you can kind of have this cascading effect where you make your side easier to fall as you climb over to the other person's side, that could be nice, right? So maybe something like this, right? Push. Ah, but again, it's caught onto that background. Darn. Darn, darn, darn. I wonder if there's a way around that. Maybe instead of a push there, you can do some kind of pull, or just leave it, maybe? But that timing is very convenient, isn't it? You can go bam, 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 and just barely make it up. Oh, but this becomes a too high here, right? Can I push this out? Does this whole thing fall? No, it doesn't. It catches onto the back. It does make it kind of interesting, right? That could be like, kind of like an anti-push. You know, you anchor on the stage so back there, it's never really gonna fall. I wonder, so typically the way that the stage falls in Catherine is where the deepest, it falls onto the furthest row, right? And so you can kind of see why even in the background, like even though this starts deeper, it actually is at the same level as what is up here. And so what I'm curious about is if there's a way where I could make the bottom extend further out than up top, right? And if so, could I change where the stage is spawning, right? So the idea there would be to go deeper and extend out my bottom, and then to go down low, extend your bottom, and make it where the stage only is falling now on your side of the stage, and take it away from your opponent. That could be neat. I don't know if there's enough room to warrant that, though. Right? Like, I can push out there. It just... Maybe you could do something like this. This is getting really ugly, I think. Yeah, I don't know. That kind of works. That's kind of the idea, but I don't know if it gets any deeper. You know what I mean? Like, if it's the same height, if it's the same level, then there's really no way that you're going to get any deeper. But I did kind of like this idea of doing something like this. It looks kind of cool. It's something different. And it doesn't really lose you any time. Not significantly, you know. It does make it hard to push out, so you are relying on X Factor at that point. Anyway, I think I'm done talking about torture. I don't like this stage. I don't like it because, to me, it's kind of boring. Like, I like the stages with lots of variations and openings and stuff. Let's see, what else is there? Quad? Okay, quad's fun. I don't know if there's too much to be said about this stage, really. Well, I say that, but that's not true at all. So I guess simple way is just to talk about push out, right? So most push outs are going to revolve around cutting the middle of the stage, right? If you think about it, it's kind of like a tree where it, you know, that's the trunk is the middle and then it branches out. And so you have to, there's no way to push out a stage if you don't push out the middle. And so you can either start from the outside in, like on Underground usually, right? You start at the wings on your side and then make your way across. Or Quadrangle is kind of neat because you can start to push out through the middle. And that's kind of important on Quadrangle because you have the face blocks there and it's immovable. So the idea here is that you have to cut out this center, which can be as simple as that. And then from here, you can just do something kind of like this, you know, and then the rest is kind of just done. I think probably you want to do something like this because remember, you know, now when I push this out, the stage is going to fall on this side and you have control over that. So that's the esky, is that push out there through the middle. I'm trying to think. I think players used to do something kind of like this to, you know, push out. They start on their side essentially, right? I mean, you can kind of see where I'm going with this. Actually, I don't know if anybody did something exactly like that. Bam, bam. But that's the way to go. Because I think there was a Sea Captain's ass crack. There was some crazy naming conventions back in the day. And I remember I didn't like that because it was kind of super easy to tell what they're doing and not too good. Oh, I messed up. Oh, I forgot to push at the start. But I kind of like that because that gives you either you can kind of continue along the bottom, right? Or if you do a pull there and something like this, you've got potential to do stuff. Again, my big thing is just, well, I want to be able to have ambiguity, and I don't want to force the game into flowcharty situations. I don't want to get into a situation where my opponent looks at my side and says, "This is the best thing I can do," very easily, right? I don't want that decision to be any easier than it has to for them. And so, because of that, I like to do lots of mix ups. I like to do openings that also are not, that give me a lot of flexibility. But again, if you're going to push out quadrangle, any push out has to tackle the center of the stage, which can be a challenge because of these immovable blocks. If you are not climbing on this, or if you are not pushing out, this stage is, how do I put this, kind of simple. Your strategy is just to get ahead and stay ahead. And at the start, you can do kind of two things. Either you run across this middle, right? That's the fastest way to get up, and then you kind of hold the line up here. Typically, you don't want to be the first one to pull because when you pull, the other player can take advantage of that and climb. And so you kind of have this leapfrog effect, right? Where you do the pulling, you do the solving, and your opponent does the winning, which isn't good. That's not what you want to do in a competitive game. So, yeah, if you are climbing, pretty much I would advise, you either go to the inside at the start, right? And obviously 2P goes left, right? And you have this inside fight, or you go to the outside. I don't exactly know how I want to explain the advantages of each. Um, but yeah, those are your two options. You either go on the outside, or you go on the inside, or you push out, or you move from one into the other. Some of the opening theory, I guess, on this stage. Important is that you don't want to get drop kicked in the center, right? Usually on every stage, this is kind of a general rule, is that drop kicks in the center are very dangerous. Because usually there's nothing there. Usually stages are symmetrical, and usually the center is kind of the bridge, and so usually there's not much actually there other than like one or two blocks connecting, right? And so you can see that philosophy here where, okay, say, 2P was standing here, right? They were a little bit slow coming up or something like that, and a player is standing on top of this ice block. Free drop kick leads to a death. And that's usually how it is on most stages. Torture Chamber and Underground are no exception. But yeah, I don't think anybody did this thing before, so that was actually kind of neat. So, I like that. Ah, right, I remember now. Sometimes it's hard to remember the exact sequence of push-outs, It's like Joe Secchi, kinda, where you kind of get the idea, but sometimes you get lost in the details. But you can do all sorts of stuff on quad. I like pulling. Spidering is going to be your best friend, and so, push usually gets rid of a block, and a pull, can be used to do a push out, can take away structure, but at the same time leaves it for later use, however you want to do it. But yeah, the climbs on quad are, super simple. They're usually just two high walls, two or three high, and so there's nothing too tricky going down. Is that, are those blocks going through the stage right now? Is that just like a classic glitch going down? That looks really weird, right? Anyway, let's go to another stage. What's next? Spiral, I think, or clock. Yeah, clock. So clock is another one of these stages. It's symmetrical. You want to avoid the middle. It's super tight. Um, I think a lot of times it kind of plays out like a rock paper scissors. So I'll start with probably the safe opening, right? Would be something like this. You know, you push out your bomb, catch this, and then from here you have a couple different options. Usually this is kind of safe. You know, you drop the tower and there's your way up. And yeah, that's pretty straightforward. All the safe openings on this stage are going to revolve around dropping it, right? Dropping your side, not push out, right? But just drop. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Typically a fast way, a fast approach is going to be something like this, right? Where you just, you know, do your climbs. Interesting note on this stage is that, this is where I kind of talk a lot of theory and philosophy about the climbing, I guess. But if, you know, let's see, how do I want to start this? So, when you get up to this second level, when you stand here, you can either go left or right. You might think to yourself, okay, well, it's symmetrical, it shouldn't matter. Well, it kind of does. Typically, the left side here, and for 2P, it's the right side. I'll just refer to that as the outside. If you go to the outside of the tower, there's less room to climb. And so, if you and your opponent are both climbing, and let's pretend that 2P is on the right side and they choose the inside to climb while you choose the outside, they will have actually advantage and they will be able to hit you when you both get up to the next level. And what will typically happen is where you just have to be careful if you climb the outside, because it's very easy to get trapped, right? There's not a lot of room for you to manipulate your climbing, especially because the bomb blocks make a lot of things disappear and cracked. And so if you go to the outside, you just have to be very careful and very aware, because usually you're at a disadvantaged position. Now the inside though is also very tricky, because I don't have a way to show it, but if both players climb to the inside, what kind of happens is something like this, right? Pretend that 2P would have pulled this block. What happens is that if both players choose to go to the inside, if you want, you can actually bridge over and take their way up, right? And that can be very scary, because the bomb blocks are going to go off, and so your side becomes a lot less viable if the other person steals the way up. So you have to be really careful if both you and your opponent go to the inside. And likewise, you have to be very careful if you go to the outside of the climb. The only one where you don't really have to be careful is where you do the safe opening. You drop a level, you drop your tower. But yeah, the only thing to be cautious of there is it lets your opponent get such a height advantage that it's pretty easy to control the stage as well, from a defense position. And then you kind of also have to be careful if they decide to cross over and take the fight to you, because you don't have too much to work with in terms of defensive blocks. Trying to think what else. Oh, I guess... Oh geez, I forget how to do the push out on this stage, but there is a push out that you can do, and I think it looks something like this. So pretty much the idea is that you take advantage of the bomb blocks, right? And obviously your opponent would have been climbing too, but you take advantage of the bomb blocks where you don't need to push everything. And so you just slowly make your way across. It's kind of similar to Underground Cemetery in that respect. Where, I'll do it again. But yeah, pretty much you grab and you toss out your middle one and you just make your way across. You do something like this. You could even do something like this if you really wanted to, right? And that would be a little bit of a mix-up, because now the stage isn't completely gone. I don't know if you would want to do that, but that is a possibility. Usually your opponent would have stepped on that bomb block, so it actually would have been gone. But yeah, so there's a push out that you can do on this stage, there is a safe opening that you can do on this stage, and there are a couple different confrontational openings that you can do on this stage. You can also do neat stuff where if you step on the bombs at different timings, they'll explode in different patterns and can kind of take your opponent off guard. Um, yeah, because the way that the bomb blocks work is where once you step on them, they enter a queue, right? And then they blow up in that order. And so if you decide to spider and step on blocks maybe after your opponent steps on them, you can change the order that they blow up in. Or you could just delay your opening. Spiral's cool. I'll just show, I guess there's like a kind of push out that you can do. And again, it kind of takes advantage of this middle block, right? So you cut out this middle column, and then from here it becomes kind of a trivial task. You know, you just do something like this, right? And even if your opponent is climbing, you can kind of climb with them a little bit. You know, the structure wasn't really endangered too much. So that's really simple. The other thing that you can do on this stage, instead of converting to a push out, you could try to shark, is usually what people call it, where you skip over this middle block and instead go right to pulling there. And if your opponent is stuck on, you know, their front level, now suddenly their middle block is missing, and it becomes, you know, a lot more difficult to do stuff with this section. Usually, let's see, I'm trying to think what else is kind of neat on the stage. If you decide to stay down low and really take the fight down there, it can get easy to be lost. But the general pattern is like, for instance, you know, say I'm here. Oh, what do I do? What do I do? Well, one thing that you can do is you can, let me pull another block here to demonstrate my point a little bit better. One thing that you can do though is generally you want to spider around and you want to pull 2 in one column for every 1 that you want to go up. And I'll make that clear when I do something like this. Say I pull this block, right, and I'm starting to come over here, and say that this block's been pulled too. Well, how do I get up? And what you can do is something kind of like this. You pull the 2 there, and then you pull the 1 in another column. And that lets you spider around and climb up. So I'll do that a little bit faster, that way the guy doesn't fall out. Or I could just do it on my side, right? Okay, say I pull 1, 2, 3, and up there, right? So that was 1 pull on that side to then recreate this section. And you can do all sorts of stuff from there, right? That's part of the reason why I like, uh-oh, accidentally killed myself here. Kind of, not really. But yeah, so spidering is super important. That's one of the reasons why I like pulling, is because it lets you do cool stuff on spiraling. So that is, I think, kind of exhausting what to do with the bottom side of the stage, which a lot of players tend to just ignore. And it's very, you know, easy to ignore because you got 4 alternating spiral blocks there. It seems like there's not a lot you can do, but there actually is. But if you're climbing, you can do a couple different things. You can do stuff like this, right, where now you have control over this spiral block on your opponent's side. You can threaten to do all sorts of mischief. Typically, something that's really cool to do on this stage is, you know, taking advantage of the spiral blocks to kind of play this, oh, how do I want to call it? Play this ranged game, where, you know, you don't, it's not always that your opponent has to worry about you drop kicking them, but they have to worry about, oh, are they going to push a black hole under me? So I did the push there. You can also extend it and pull from the outermost block, and then you have control over both spiral blocks. You do have to be a little bit careful because I call anything where if both players do the same exact opening, and it leads to kind of a stalematey position, I kind of call all those things the idiot push, because that comes from Cathedral, where it's most apparent, where if both players do this exact same opening, they just both get stuck. And so I like to avoid openings that, if both players do them, do stupid things like that. I prefer the asymmetrical kind of openings. And so that's typically why I prefer to do something like that. Um, where it doesn't matter if my opponent tried to do the same thing because, you know, uh, either both players can't do the same thing or it takes advantage of turning the stage, usually because all stages usually start symmetrical. It takes advantage to turn it asymmetric, and then once that happens you can both do different things. So it's kind of abstracty talking right now, but hopefully that gets some of the idea across. um, but yeah, I really like Spiral. It's probably one of my least better maps personally, but I like it from a conceptual point of view. And it is a little bit tricky sometimes to push out because you see there was a too high level, but there was a block over top of a spiral block, which would have made it much more difficult to push out. I think I've pretty much exhausted talking about the openings on this stage, the opening theory. Um, you know, you could do something like this where you push out your spiral block as well, and then that gives you free reign to kind of not worry if your opponent does a push. You don't have to worry as much because you can escape it. Yeah. So that pretty much sums up Spiral, I think. I'm trying to remember what is left, and I think Cathedral. Cathedral and Imperio. There are only a couple of stages. I think there's only 9 stages, and only 7 of them are legal in this one. But Cathedral's cool. It's more complicated um, than... It's like a more complicated Underground. And in Classic, there's all sorts of stuff that you can do with it. For a long time, pretty much the motto was, you can make anything work on Cathedral, and so I'll just cover a couple of the basic things. If you want something that's fast, you can do this idiot push. It should become pretty apparent why it's called the idiot push. If both players try to push, because they're trying to take advantage of the fact that if they push this middle row, they can force their block to fall and climb up. But if both players are trying to push, right, it becomes this thing where you both get stuck. You know, neither player can get the advantage super clearly. So that's why I don't like that, but that one's the fastest. Something that you can do that can lead into a push out, or I'll just say something that you can do that's a little bit safer is something like this, where you make your side fall, kind of similar to the clock tower approach, and then from there you can kind of climb your side without worrying too much. One thing that you probably should be aware of is that when let's see. So, the base of the tower on both player sides is very deep, right? You see how it's 3 deep here. And so something that you have to be aware of is if you are deciding to take time to develop your side, something like this, right? This is what I would call a development move. If your opponent is above you, they could threaten to pin you much easier. You know, if somebody does the idiot push, right, and you decide to do development moves, then if they take advantage and they're ahead of you and they dive, it's much easier for them to pin you. Let's see, I'm trying to think what else you can do. You can do a push out on this stage by something like this. It's been so long since I've played this, so forgive me if I mess up. But the idea is that you cut this center bit and then you cross over, right? I think I'm kind of one of the dudes who has made that a little bit more viable, a little bit more popular. And it's a little bit of a slower push out, but you don't have to worry too much because Cathedral is so big that it does just take longer to climb. But so the idea is that you push out this bit and then this one, and then you pull, and there goes that usually kind of tricky. You see how that's 5 blocks there that just went away, and that cuts out the center column. And then you can cross over, right? You can cross over later. You can do variations on this however you want. But the idea is that you do something like this, right? Especially if you get a block or something like that, it makes crossing over much easier. And then from there, you can kind of cut the stage. So, let's see. That was a slower opening, which is safer. That was a push out, and that also showed a really fast opening. I'm trying to wonder if there's anything else that we can do. Something that I used to play around with was the idea and really the desire to want to do some kind of opening that takes advantage of the depth of the stage and tries to climb in the tower. I haven't come up with anything, so maybe let's see if I can theory craft something on the fly here. No, this isn't quite what I want. But you can do something like this though too, now that I think about it. Yeah, it doesn't quite work. It's usually very difficult to climb the tower from behind or inside. And so I'm not seeing a super easy way to do it here. Maybe you could do something like this. You could take advantage of that falling block, and then that way, and make that side fall. And then you could do something like this, right? Oh yeah, that's something I forgot to mention is that you can easily cross over to your opponent's side on this stage. It's deceptively easy because it looks like, you know, you guys are like separated by 3 blocks or something like that to start your landings. And so it looks like, oh yeah, I shouldn't have to worry about my opponent. But depending on how they build out their base, you really do. I mean, even if you can go from the safe opening into crossing over pretty easily. You can kind of see where I'm going with it, hopefully, from here, right? This worked out because I had the item, but you could just as easily pull that block around. But it's actually pretty easy to just cross over to your opponent's side and cause mischief. You know. So that's something else to keep in mind. So, yeah. I am going to try one more thing, I think, to try to climb your own tower from inside. Let's see if I can come up with something slick. So what if you pull this all the way around? The idea there is to take advantage of and the depth and make a 2 deep side over here. And then what if I go up and push this in, make that block fall, and then... Geez, this is tough, huh? I don't know if there's a really easy way to do that. No. Thought I was onto something there. I want to do something really cool that would look really, you know, slick and tournament. Maybe... Okay, what if I take advantage of both of these? And what if I move that bridge over to here? Right? And what if I do something like this? Still didn't quite work out. But I think I'm onto something there. So first is, can you climb it? And then, how viable is that climb? And so I'm thinking, something like this kinda, I think, gives us a nice shape to work with. If we get a block that's really nice, I like the idea of pushing that. And let's even go one step further and push it out even more. I mean, if you do something like this, this actually works out pretty nice, right? And that seems fairly safe, actually, I think. Like, you don't have to worry about your opponent dropping on you because you have a roof over your head, right? It's not full body, so you don't have to worry about reversals. To kind of see what I'm talking about, if you do this, right, something like this, and you do a push. Oh no, I wanted to pull, push, in. And once you get to here, you're actually pretty safe. You've got this roof over your head. Right, I could do something like this all day. And I don't have to worry about being drop kicked from above. The only time I have to worry about is right at the start, but your opponent can't. I don't think they can get there fast enough for that to really be a problem. That's kind of cool, I guess. I don't know, I'm not very satisfied with that. Let's see if I can do something else that looks slick. What if... Now this ends up in the same kind of position. Actually, a little bit different, but yeah. I mean, so this one works out because I got a block, but you might not always. I don't know, man. This is a tricky one. But now I'm kind of determined, so I'll give it I'll give it an honest try. Let's see. What if I do something like this? And I decide to take it even one higher. Does this give me anything? Not really. I mean, so this one works out conveniently. Not even that conveniently, right? I mean, there's just so many better ways to climb, I think, that you're not really given anything by trying to climb the tower inside. But I think it was worth a shot. And it just is very... I don't know. I am curious, what if you take that bridge and instead you just push it on this side? Right? That looks kind of cool. That gives you some neat stuff to work with. That leaves your tower super intact. But, yeah, I don't know if that really gives you too much. I might pull that out just because I think, odds-wise, it gives you the same, you know. But, that's kind of cool. So the idea there is just flip the stairs, right? The stairs are conveniently on the left, so you just move them over. The stairs are on the outside, rather, I should say. And so you just pull them over and put them on the inside. And I'll talk about Imperial a little bit too, even though questionable legality. So pretty much there are two ways really to play the stage. You either climb and you have this early fight. Well, you either have an early fight, so one player gets ahead and you have some defensive plays, or something in between. So usually what people do is they do something like this, right? And depending on how these monster blocks come out, the stage might change. It's very difficult / impossible. It's impossible to practically push out the stage, and that's because it's framed in these immovable blocks. You know, part of the thing that made Quadrangle so difficult to push out was just having that one or the two immovable blocks in the center column, and this one has, immovable blocks throughout. So even from a theoretical standpoint, it's pretty tricky. You can take advantage of a glitch, kind of. Not really a glitch, but you can take advantage of blocks falling to get around this. I think there's a clip of it somewhere online that I did, but pretty much the idea is that you push out blocks that so the idea would be something like, if I wait long enough, right, and I time the stage falling out to also coincide with the time that if I do a push, an immovable block will fall. It is possible, right, 1, 2, 3, 4, if I go here, I can time it to where I can actually get rid of an immovable block. And if I get rid of immovable blocks while I am climbing up the tower, I can remove them completely, right? So that's the idea. And it is possible to do, theoretically, but the timing required for that is very tricky, and I wouldn't trust it. So I don't think we'll ever see a practical push out on this stage. But one thing that you can do to make it kind of more cool is you can do something like this, where you push out the 3, right, and then you drop your side lower. What does that really give you? Well, it lets your opponent climb a little bit, which lets you farm more easily. If you see your opponent trying to play defense over the middle while you are pushing your side out, what you can do instead is you can do something like this. You can push on the outside, right? And then this gives you another block to kind of work with, so you're not stuck on this row of immovables, which can be very scary because, if you get drop kicked, it's a combo because you can't push out the block, you can't DP, you can't Dragon Punch. So yeah, so either you climb and you have this fight in the middle, or you can kind of do some kind of push out thing like that. I don't want to say push out, I'm sorry, a drop. Trying to think if there's anything else really cool that you can do. I guess you can kind of do something similar to what we do in Quadrangle, or we do something like this, right? And we drop out this middle column, and then we can do something like that. And if you time that with the stage falling, it might be possible to get rid of one side fairly easily. But you do still have this problem on the outside over there. So, let's see, if I'm thinking about this, what might be the best way to try to push out this stage? And it might be something kind of like... Ooh, let's see if I can come up with something crafty here. Something like this. Oops, I totally messed that up. But the idea is that you just lower some of the dark blocks so that you don't have to worry about dropping a whole column of dark blocks, and instead just dropping one dark block. So the idea there would be something like this. But then the middle gets caught if you do it that way, which makes the middle much, impossible to push out. So you gotta do it a little bit differently. So maybe one way to set up for that would be to do 2 pulls. Maybe. Let's see. So let's say I do bam, 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 right? And I go 1 over, something like this. You see, that's something else you have to be aware of, is that depending on how the monster blocks move, they can catch it. But maybe you can see how if I were to time out that push to where the whole right side were to collapse as the stage was falling, it would be much easier for me to possibly push it out. Let's try that one more time. Maybe something like bam, 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 in, out, over, there goes the middle. Something like, and then I would wait, right? So, wait a little bit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, out. Oh, but if I were to push that and then that fell, I wouldn't have really too much to worry about, I don't think. See if I can get the timing right. It might be good just to have it. But that might be cool. But yeah, again, you have to wait so long that now you have to also worry about, okay, well, is the stage going to fall consistently or not? And there, bam, it got caught in the center there, so this whole thing kind of becomes moot, right? Even if I time this properly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right? Even if I were to time that properly, there's still some stuff that gets caught, and it becomes... that one's kind of doable to do, but it's very tricky and not very practical. And we are all about the practical stuff here. But anyway, yeah, so with this opening, you can either do some kind of drop like that, or you have an early fight. And that's really all there is to it for Imperio. It's kind of why I don't like... Even though I fought for it to not be banned, I don't like this stage that much. Yeah, I think that covers opening theory on all of them, all the stages in Classic. Those are all my thoughts. So yeah.